after 9 months, we started exploring other communities, and we started, saying to ourselves, like, okay, let's be realist. Even though this community needs income really, really badly, we have to go with a community who's ready. And once we found that community, it happened really quickly. It was like in 1 month. And that's what community power is.
Welcome back, everybody. Rich Brubaker, founder of Collective Responsibility, here to another episode of the Mission Driven Podcast. Through this podcast, I'm speaking with members of the mission driven ecosystem, entrepreneurs, accelerators, investment bankers, academics, trying to figure out what does it take to move from impact to scale when it comes to driving through environmental, social, economic challenges that we face in our countries. For me, this is all about moving from inspiration to action through equipment, empowerment, mindset, tool set. And the only way I've figured out how to do that at scale is to talk to others about the work they're doing, the path they're on, the scale they're seeing, and the challenges they're trying to solve every day. So with that, I'm really excited to be joined by Tara Susanto, the founder of Tara. It's a company that's on a mission to conserve, protect, and restore Indonesia's rainforest and uplift socioeconomic living standards through this ecosystem. For me, it's a really interesting platform because what they're trying to do is take biodiversity, but also address the poverty systems, bring those two things together, hopefully find a business model. Maybe they found it, we'll find out through this conversation, but really trying to mix two what are often believed to be distinct issues, but in respect of local communities, local ecosystems, bring those two things together, find a business plan that hopefully over time will come to scale and will solve challenges at a scalable size. So with that, Tara, thank you very much for taking the time to join us. It's really great to have you here to talk about the work that you're doing, even though you're still in very much startup mode, a couple of years old, teams building, learning how to manage work from home, management systems, fundraising. So as a starting point, it'd be really great to have you introduce yourself and the work that you're doing at Tara.
Great. Hi, everyone. And thanks, Rich, for inviting me on this podcast. It's really a great honor to be sitting here and talking to you today. So just as an introduction, my name is Tara. I'm one of the co-founders at Tara. And what we do essentially at Tara is reforest degraded lands in Borneo. And how we do that is through a subscription service that companies pay to us on a monthly basis. And in return, we give them data points such as carbon sequestration rates, seedling survival rates, how much biodiversity has come back into that plot of land and in its surroundings. And perhaps most importantly, what people really want to know these days is that how many community members have been impacted as a result. So at the end of the day, what people are really paying for in our subscription service is the impact data that we measure and we provide. And the best thing about that is that we're not just helping people reforest, measure their climate action. We're actually helping people do the climate action after they are measured. So in that process, we help a lot of people. We help a lot of things. It's not just about tree planting and bringing back the animals, but as we go through the work, we see that this work actually helps everyone who is involved in the ecosystem. And from then on, hopefully we can find a business model that benefits everyone involved, even the brands, the commercials.
That's great. In your mission statement, you mentioned kind of two core challenges that you're working on. One is, Indonesia's rainforest, so biodiversity, reforestation, and the second is more socioeconomic, so poverty alleviation. Can you speak to the size and scope of each challenge? Because these are both very large challenges for Indonesia. What's the roots of the challenge? How big is it? And from there, what's the interconnection that you guys have drawn through this? Why bring those two things together as your mission?
That's a great question. And the thing is, when we started this work, we realized we couldn't look at poverty and the natural degradation separately. Yes, we can separate them in some ways, but there's just so much interconnection that's happening. And part of the degradation that's happening in Borneo, West Kalimantan, is because of enclosing forest converting industries that are basically bad for the environment. So you're talking about logging, mines, palm, and the traditional forest conversion practices, right? And the thing is, the number one person or peoples who are impacted by these activities are usually people who used to live off these forests. So the connection is on a very basic level, it's just right there. Let's say one of these industries encroach upon a governmentally subsidized area. The thing is, there's a lot of little things that are not written on paper as to how the locals live their lives around forest or utilize the forest. Like, for example, when I was living with them, we would go to the forest almost every day to look for spices, to forage for weeds and other stuff that we might eat throughout the day. And they do this on a daily basis. And this is just one part of it, right? Other parts are like if you have ancestral lands. So people who have ancestral lands have been passed down for generations, even before these businesses existed, but they do not have the necessary paperwork to prove that, then they don't have that legal power or political power to voice out their concerns. So without those papers to prove that this land belongs to them, there's a lot of displacement that happens. And that's where poverty kicks in, because when you lose your home, you lose your foundation, you lose your ability to make money, your ability to, there's just a lot of injustice that we're seeing that now a lot of people are actually labeling as climate injustice. So I think that's where the interconnectedness is, and the depth of the problem, it's very visible, right? Even from satellite images, you can see that we've lost 70% of our rainforests, and we're still losing them. When you arrive in Pontianak or its nearby town, Sintang, for example, you will fly down, and from the above, you'll see, oh, it's very green. But like when your plane is on taxi, you'll just see rows and rows and rows of palm oil.
Right.
That's just from the visibility aspect. But when you go down and talk to people, for example, me as a reforestation person, I come down and I introduce them to a program. They literally think we are planting palm. They have no understanding that what we're doing is reforesting and bringing their forests back. They wouldn't have any clue as to why we would ever want to do this, because they have been taught that forests are not as useful as palm.
Yeah, and on the idea, like, why are we doing this? Can you talk about like the founding pain point of Moving Terra? Like, where did you come up with this idea, and what catalyzed you and your partner to come together to work on this?
So we started from carbon trading, and it was pretty straightforward. It was kind of like a buy low, sell high situation. Like my partner was mostly doing the work. He was mostly doing the trading, but we were selling it to businesses who had net zero goals or who wanted some sustainably branding that is beyond the traditional reduce, reuse, recycle approach, right? And then we started talking about vintage carbon credits, which is right now like a very arguable topic, but it was something that we were talking about like just 2 years ago when we were starting this, that vintage credits don't make sense to the end customer, because the end customers, they want to save the world now. So why would they ever buy something that was sequestered or offset back in 2015? And the 2015 vintages are still going around. So we start looking into supply, and we start going into these forests ourselves and figuring out how can we actually start making our own project. And then what we discovered was that there are so many significant smallholders who have, let's say, 1 hectare or 2 hectares of ancestral land that do not have any documentation and are under such massive economic pressure for them to be monetized, which makes them so vulnerable to these forest conversion industries to come in and be like, hey, we've got a business model that works for you,
Right.
And so like we started thinking that, okay, these hectares sound small. It's just 1, 2, 3. But then if you create a community model that works, and if you combine, let's say 100 community members, that's 100 hectares, right? And that's 100 hectares without having to employ people, like bring them from Java and then put them in Kalimantan and start reforesting. It's actually, you don't have to move anyone around. It's them taking care of their own land, getting back their political and legal power, and finding a regular income that works for their family. So basically that's where that's where the pain point was. It was
Okay.
kind of just realizing, okay, credits don't really make sense right now. So what
Yeah.
can make sense for everyone in that moment?
Well, and I'm curious, like when you're creating this platform, how did this one make better
Hmm.
sense? I mean, you're going to be doing more
Right.
work to talk
Yeah.
to 100 people for 300 hectares
Yeah.
maximum.
Uh-huh.
You were going to put in more costs, so your buy low is going to get higher, and your
That's right.
sell
Yeah.
high is going to stay the same. So you were building something that, was going to be less profitable, less easily to manage. Like, why make that
Hmm.
jump? Why not just stay in the vintage? Why not look for
Hmm.
larger,
Hmm.
plots of land or larger
Yeah.
farmers that you could just, platform?
Like it just seemed like such a huge financial cost when there is a
Right.
readily made available solution there. If we just took the time and effort to socialize these people to make them understand the advantages that they can have over the disadvantages that they have been receiving. It's just
Yeah.
that no one has ever felt that this was a disadvantage because they just felt like, oh, okay, this is the only solution I had is to sell my ancestral land
Hmm.
to basically a bunch of people with bulldozers and tools. When we actually did the work, we were so surprised at the amount of ease that came with it. So yes, max 100 people in one village, but also when we did the socialization, when we did the program introduction, we
Mm.
invited the village elders, we got permission from the head of the village, and then, they were surveying how many people were kind of interested in this model, and 100 people showed up. It was
Nice.
crazy, 100 people. And this is one village with three little sub mini villages,
Mm.
which could mean that there were, I think, around 1,000 people who were living in these places.
Okay.
And by the second week, my field ops was saying to me, Tara, can you give us some money to go into the city because we need to print more registration forms because there's like
Mm.
another 100 people who are interested in a program. And
Wow.
I
So
was
quick
really
success.
surprised. Yeah, I was really, really surprised that
What was
basically
what was
everyone was
bringing
just
them in?
writing
Was
it
it
down.
just because you're paying them money and they need the money, or what was the reason why they were like, "Hey, we want to participate in this"?
I think number one, it's definitely the financial benefits. So how it works in Terra is that since it's a subscription service for a monthly basis, that means we have a stream of income that comes into Terra every month, and then we can split some of those income to pay these stakeholders as rent. So
Yeah.
it's a basic rent money to not do anything with your land, and then it's an additional labor money if you also help us reforest on that land.
Yeah.
So what was degraded land that they've been used for circular farming, and that they have to now wait for the next season to harvest. It was just like staying there, right? Like not being
Mm.
productive. Now that Bumitera comes in, they can actually turn this land into something productive with
Hmm.
income. So with other industries, sometimes you cannot monetize your land. An example of palm, sometimes you can't monetize anything until the
Right.
fruit actually drops. So you have
Right.
to wait at least 6 years, 5 years maybe if you manage it well, but 5 to 6 years before you can actually harvest your palm and then cultivate it.
Mm.
But with Bumitera, you're getting paid from day one, from the moment you're collecting seedlings and putting them to nurseries, and just literally talking to the Bumitera team, helping us fly these drones and map your entire area.
Mm.
So it's like a stable income for them. We also plant high value vegetation. So we take indigenous practices into account and we ask
Yeah.
them, what kinds of plants do you want to see? And in our area right now, a lot of them are saying like durian. And we're like, oh, great. Durian can grow
Mm.
really big, has big leafy greens, also great carbon sequestration tree. So we add it onto our species list. And the thing is, because it's their land, it's their tree, that gets passed down. Now their
Yeah.
kids are not going to want to cut that tree down because they know this land produces great durian that they can one day sell.
Mm. Mm.
So I think the advantages there are definitely financial, number one. And
Yeah.
then when we step into 6 months, 8 months into the program, we have community surveys basically of how
Mm.
asking them how satisfied they are. They would say something deeper, like once their financial needs are covered, then they would express something deeper, such as um, I feel really grateful that I can pass down my knowledge that was passed down from my father to
Hmm.
my kids now. Or something like, yeah, it's great that I don't have to think about finding another plot of land to plant
Yeah.
rice because now I have this income. All of these social, cultural exchanges started happening once their basic financial needs are met.
How much of that did you understand you would be participating when you started this? Because I mean,
Oh my God, that's a
you
great question. Yeah.
you guys are both
Uh,
really young. I mean, it was like you were kind of like you start up in one area, you pivot into this. Like, how much of
mhm,
this was kind of planned, and how much of it is
mhm.
holy crap? Like it happened.
Yeah, we started realizing carbon credits was kind of not for us maybe 3 months into Tara being established. So that was really quick.
Yeah.
But in order for us to find the right community, it took us 9 months. So we did have a starting plot, but the community wasn't very strong. So sadly, in very vulnerable communities, which actually where the program should thrive, it's still really difficult because they don't have basic needs met. They don't have a lot of support from their municipal office either. And that was our first plot. So it was really hard to get things going. We had to teach them
Mm,
how to read, like some cases was really bad. Um, so after 9 months, we started exploring other communities and we started, saying to ourselves, like, okay, let's be realists. Even though this community
yeah.
needs income really badly, we have to go with a community who's like ready to
Mm,
roll. And once we found that community who was ready,
yeah.
it happened really quickly. It was like in 1 month, we could set up all of these educational programs. We could set up more orientation to show them how to actually plant them. And that's what community power is.
Yeah.
It's not Tara and James having to go into the jungle every single week to like tell them what to do. It's about like teaching one group and having that group educate everyone else. That's
Right.
community power right there. And I'm having goosebumps as I was saying as I'm saying this, because that's what people underestimate, right? Like, you think this is a lot of work, like going and convincing everyone, speaking to them one by one is a lot of work.
Mm,
But the thing is, I feel that we underestimate, even myself included, we underestimated how primal people connect and communicate in these
yeah.
communities. It's like, if I don't trust you, I don't trust you. I don't like your
Yeah.
product. Bye. We go our separate ways. But if I trust you, I'm going to
Hmm.
help you and follow you till the ends of the earth. Like
Yeah.
it's really strong, that kind of word of mouth that
Yeah. Well,
um
I had a
yeah.
conversation last night with someone in Africa about how a lot of nonprofits and philanthropists they'll grant money to these local organizations, but in reality they
Mhm.
don't trust them at all. They'll be like, "Don't waste my money. You can't use more than
Mm.
this." Blah blah
Mhm,
blah blah
mhm.
blah. They don't believe that actually there's any capacity or any sense of ownership at the local community level. And I'm wondering, was that something that you thought going into this, and what do you have to say about that now?
So I was really afraid that, they would just kind of like, oh, yay, money, not gonna do their work. But
Yeah.
actually, if you have like a good community leader, so like an elder that they really listen to, and if you can connect to that leader and have that
Mhm.
leader be your basically your beacon of light and be the influencer of that group,
Yeah.
you just need this leader to have enough common sense to
Mm.
to make people understand that you still need to do the work in order for the income to still come in.
Yeah.
That's additional community education for free if we find the
Yeah.
right person to lead the program, which is why
Mm.
making that first person connection is so important. There's
Right.
also another worry of like having an increased income. There's leakage issues and leakage worries, right? So what if with this additional income, they go off and buy another plot of land and then
Yeah.
they do more unplanned deforestation and then plant palm.
Yeah.
Our
Right.
biggest fear. So we haven't seen any cases of that yet 1 year in.
Hmm.
The restoration program's been a year now. It's approaching a year and 3 months.
Yeah.
So we haven't seen any of that yet. Hopefully we won't have to, but
Yeah.
I definitely foresee some of those cases happening. And
Yeah.
that
But how
just
do you,
means we have to put more work into it.
what have you learned about trust through that then? Because I mean, you talk
Mm,
about you need to learn how to trust the communities, and the communities have
right. Yeah.
significant trust in there. Like, what have you learned about how to open yourself up to
Right. Yeah.
trusting others? Because
Yeah.
yeah, you're dependent upon a leader, you're
Mm-hmm.
dependent upon a
Mm-hmm.
lot of different things, but at some point you have to give up and just trust, right? So what have
Yeah.
you learned about that?
I think it goes a long way if the founder or the guy on top just goes into the site directly and just does the work.
Yeah,
Like it takes one day for you to fly to Kalimantan and
yeah,
sit down with them, have lunch with them, and take a scoop and plant together with them.
hmm,
And that goes a long way. And so what I think trust here is that people need to see you do the work. They need
yeah,
to see that you're not just all talk and that you're
mm,
willing to get down and dirty with them and actually do the work with them, which is why in the beginning, James and I went almost every 2 weeks to make
mm,
sure everything was running smoothly. And we
yeah,
were on call with the field ops team every single day about what's going on.
yeah,
Like a single movement from like a little dissident or like someone who's untrusting, we need to hear about it and then
yeah,
address those concerns right away and talk to the person right away, even if it's on a phone or it's
hmm,
over Zoom or whatever. But I really think trust is about making people see that you're not just talking, you're doing the walking with
yeah.
them. I think that was really big. And I was surprised by the number of appreciation people felt when they saw that we came down and did the work with them.
So how did that change your relationship? Because I mean, I know like one of your worst fears is that they're going to take this money, they're going to go start a palm plantation next door. I mean, a lot of global organizations like a
Yeah.
WWF or
Hmm.
Nature Conservancy or Conservation International, like
Hmm.
you can see they're constantly struggling with
Yeah.
this problem.
Yeah.
How does you being on the ground, like what's a
Hmm.
lesson for them about building trust?
Like it's not enough to just sit down and have lunch with them.
Mm,
It's that you have to show the results almost immediately. So we promised big things, right? We promised
yeah.
that, you're going to get income monthly. In
Hmm.
that same month the program is released, you better get the income down to them. And like the first 3 months was so crucial for that. Just delivering what you promise, as simple as that, is really, really important. Well, I guess eating together is like really important too, because once they
Yeah.
understand that, Bumi Terra is all about reforesting, they have this moral responsibility too to answer to us if they do decide to build a palm plantation. And I know this is like a really really immeasurable metric, right? It's not
Right.
something that you can measure on paper, and it's
Yeah.
human emotions. It's so difficult. But I think
Yeah.
that was one of the risks we were willing to take, and
Hmm.
perhaps a risk we haven't fully assessed yet, considering that we've only been into this program for 1 year. Also, the logic is that if there are more and more spaces being restored, then there should be less and less space available to be degraded. So that's
Mm,
also like another thought that we had. And if really, because we're operating strictly on private ancestral lands, technically they shouldn't be able to, like ravage others with their now new
yeah.
income. We want them to be able to channel those income into something else, like education, for example.
Yeah.
Which is why we not only build reforestation programs with them, we're now working on a climate education program that
Okay.
we're going to give to their teachers for free,
Hmm.
so that they can, channel their money into something else. So we also work very hand in hand with the head of the village to see what the community directly needs.
Hmm.
And I think we're lucky that this community is such a kind one. We're
Yeah.
actually now exploring our second community, and they're going to have their own personality too. But I think if you just sit down and figure out what they really need and give and try to pivot your way into giving that to them instead of,
Yeah.
because in some cases the Bumi Terra restoration plan may not work for a certain community for different reasons that we don't know. It
Mm,
just happens to work with this community, and now we just have to
right.
figure out that they actually use the money on things we want them to spend it on.
Yeah.
So we do also have like a cultural operations analyst on our team
Mm.
who's working really closely with me to figure out where we can channel their money.
So I was gonna say, like, that's actually a very honest statement. Like, some of them may not work for us. Like, it's a
Mm.
very, let's just say a self-aware or a self-assessment pretty early, like, yeah, we're not for everyone. And I'm curious, how did you come to understand that? Because most people in our space are like, we are the solution, we are the silver bullet, everyone should
Yeah,
follow us. But
yeah.
then too, like, what are you looking for in a good leader or partnership or community? Because you mentioned like, the
Mm.
first one's like a dream, and now you have a
Yeah,
cultural kind of person. Like, what are
yeah.
the things that you're looking at when you're going into a
Mhm.
village to assess if they're the
Yeah.
right one?
We could call this one our second actually. And I think it was because our pilot community just had everything that was not great about
Yeah.
starting the restoration plan that we could finally come into this one. But if I had to say green flags, number one, women and children are seen everywhere. So women and children are seen outside and they feel safe, they walk, they have fun in
Mm,
the afternoons, like when the kids come home from school. Our first community was primarily made up of men, and we never really see women around. And if even if we did, they weren't like really doing anything, so they weren't really empowered. But
mm,
women in this village, they were always doing something, like they were doing crafts or they're cooking for the family and stuff like that. So I think
yeah.
number one is like that community diversity and vibrancy,
Mm,
especially in vulnerable individuals like women and children. And number two is a proper municipal kind of leadership. So if the head of the village is active, if their office looks good, like
yeah.
it's not tearing apart, and they actually have tools, like at least like a few computers to work with, it means that
Hmm.
they're well funded to some degree, or the leader cares to keep the funding going for their
Yeah.
village. So I think those two things would be what I would look for first and foremost.
Hmm.
And the third one, which is the I think the conversion point for Bumitera, is if they have degraded land that's not being used for anything and that they want to use for something. So they
Okay.
have all of these things, great, but they're also facing some sort of pressure to make
Yeah.
their asset monetizable.
Now, as you grow, I mean, you're gonna have to create a process around that, right? Like, you can't go in and
Yeah.
everything is customized and bespoke.
Hmm.
Are there areas that you've learned over the last year that have the potential for process? And are there areas that you think like, oh God, this is gonna be a really hard one to
Mm.
replicate without
Hmm.
the one-on-one? Because I think, if we want to save the world, we can't, everything can't be a
Yeah.
one-on-one, right? Like, it's got to have
Hmm.
some measure of like, you've been at this a year. What are some areas that you found process, and what are some areas that you're struggling with it?
We're letting kind of like this community spread its word, right?
Hmm.
Like it's almost biblical, like what we're doing. We're just kind
Mm,
of like letting it seep and letting others like see the benefits, and then letting like one point spread
love
from
it.
there, which is why, yeah, which is why we're not exploring other parts of Indonesia yet. Because
Yeah.
then if we have to handle a project in Kalimantan and then we go to like another community in Sulawesi, it's like a completely different story. Like and like you said, like if you want to scale and save the world really quickly, we can't customize everything.
Yeah.
So I think on the operations, it's pretty subtle. Like we just have to find other neighboring points, neighboring villages that have very similar conditions, and then see where we go from there.
Yeah. So actually, I remember you had a quote on LinkedIn that said, "It's been a grueling half year since we started thinking about what we can do beyond carbon credits at Bumitera.
Yeah.
And since then, we've been through so many adjustments." What's the process of being an entrepreneur been like for you? I mean, again,
Mhm.
young entrepreneur, first at bat. What's this process been like for you personally? And
Okay.
what have you learned? What have you gone through? What are the
Mm.
lessons that you take away from this last 2 years? Like, wow, like,
Yeah.
this has been
Yeah.
quite the journey.
Yeah, I think nothing humbles you more than starting your own business. Like when you first start off with an idea, you think like, oh yeah, I'm gonna be a billionaire, I'm gonna make so much money out of this. And then you start doing it, and then you realize, God, I know nothing at all. So I
Yeah.
think the biggest lesson is definitely humility. This is cliche. They say like, fail fast, then succeed faster. But it really is true. Like
Right.
you just gotta make sure that, I feel that everybody in life has a quota for failing. It's a question
Hmm.
of whether or not you want to fail early on in life or like later on in life. And man,
Right.
I don't want to be failing when I'm 50. Like while I have the energy and And, well, I have the energy to do that. I might as well fail
Yeah.
now. So I think the the biggest takeaway from everything is that, dude, like, don't even sweat about failing. Everyone
Mm,
fails. It's definitely, all about putting in the work and
mm.
not being afraid to fail, because we should really normalize failing and normalize how everything is basically a 99% chance of failing anyway. So you
You might
should
as well
just
have
go
fun.
for it. Yeah,
Yeah.
you might as well have fun and just go for it, and be honest about your journey, because it's not going
Yeah.
to help anyone if you don't share the fact that you fail like almost on a daily
Yeah.
basis. Like, get
How
better.
open can you be about your failures? I mean, I've been talking about my
Oh,
burnouts and failures for a number of years
yeah,
because I don't
yeah.
care. At the risk of financial ruin, I really just don't care sometimes. I'm really just trying to get the community moving forward. But honestly, like I've been told so many times, like, do not
Hmm.
share this. Show
Hmm.
positivity,
Oh,
have the
yeah.
growth mindset. Like,
Oh,
but is
yeah.
that realistic? And do you think like putting things out like it's been grueling? Do you think that that's hurting you? Do you think that's the right thing to do?
Hmm.
Like, how do you put that into perspective?
I think on social media, I'd probably go with like a 80-20 principle. Like, 20% of your time post your failures, and then 80% of the time post your
Mm,
successes, because that's just how, I guess, social media and how
yeah,
people work, right? And the
right.
thing is, people talk about growth mindset all the time, but
Yeah.
they don't say that there is no growth without failures. I personally believe that if you're vulnerable about your failures, then
Hmm.
others who see your vulnerability just trust you so much more, and then
Mm,
also realize that, oh, if Tara can fail, then it's probably fine
it's
that I
okay.
fail too, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. and then
right.
and then you just kind of create this culture where you're constantly inviting others to try and join the work.
Yeah,
You're not making it intimidating for others to join sustainability, which is
yeah,
such an intimidating work, like
right,
you see
right,
everyone posting on LinkedIn, and it's all about like CCUs, or someone's coming up with like a really crazy
right.
like EV battery that lasts like 50 years. And like all of this stuff is so intimidating, and for the
Mm,
ordinary person who only knows how to recycle their shopping bags, it's like, how do I
yeah,
even start? How do I even contribute? So I feel like,
yeah,
especially in the sustainability industry, you have to be vulnerable about these things, because this
yeah,
is the hardest thing that humanity has ever had to do. And so it makes sense that we are
yeah.
gonna fail, and we're gonna like find this
So,
pretty
what are
difficult.
your stages of accepting your failing to learning
Hmm.
from that? Does it start with ice cream in a screen
Okay.
bottle? Like, what's your process? Like when the wheels are coming
Okay.
off,
Yeah.
how do you one recognize that you're going the wrong way or that you're failing or however you want to
Hmm.
frame that? And then what's the
Okay.
process for getting back on track?
So on a micro things, it's like, don't even sweat it, just like
Yeah,
automatic, right? But on like the bigger things, like things that you have already invested time in, like especially that first pilot project where everything was just going south. We were nine
yeah,
months in, paying our field ops, we bought tools and everything.
hmm,
Um, I think it was like a moment of like, it was like a bang realization where I thought like, we have to cut our losses and just pack up and leave. And that was actually when one of my team members sat me down and just told me what was going on, just became super vulnerable. She was crying, she was telling me like, it's impossible, blah, yada yada yada. I'm so traumatized. And that was what made me go like, I have to stop this insanity. Like, it's too much. Putting vulnerability back here. Like, if my team members were not brave enough to come to me and tell
hmm,
me that, I would have never been able to realize that I needed to stop then and there. So
yeah,
that process to me was like, I didn't even have time to console myself. It was crisis mode. It was like, definitely was a mistake on me and James' part for letting this like run for like too long, but we didn't even have
sure,
time to lick our wounds. So we were like, okay, pack up
yeah,
the ice cream, we eat it on the way. And
right,
honestly, I think in the short term, when you're dealing with a mistake that is looking like a crisis, that's all you can do. And
yeah.
then once
But
the storms kind
how
of
many
like settle down. Mhm.
how many of those do you look back at 6 months ago and go, that wasn't even a crisis?
Oh my God, that's such a great question. That's
right?
such a great question. Yeah, you're right.
Because you really think that you're going through
Yeah,
hell, but actually you were nowhere near. Like it wasn't
yeah.
even a big problem. It was one of those things that should have just been automatic. Like, do you find that over time you get better at turning what used to be a big crisis into something like, ah, we've been through that 3 times, no problem.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, like, definitely. As a woman myself, I find so many people kind of like underestimating the work that I do and
Mm,
just sometimes being really rude to me in general. And I used to take them so personally, but
yeah,
now I look back and I just don't even waste my time on them anymore. So definitely those kinds of like mini crises
yeah,
make you so much stronger. And now that when I'm dealing with a problem,
hmm,
I don't even see them as failures anymore, if that makes sense. Like
yeah,
I don't even label them fail. Like it's not even like a word in my internal lexicon anymore. Like
sure,
it's just part of something that you have to do. Like, okay, what's next? What's next? What's next?
yeah,
And
yeah.
then when you rest in the weekends, that's when you reconcile with your feelings and like,
Mm.
okay, this is how I felt about it, but that's okay because I'm already doing the next step.
How important is your idealism and passion for the topic to get you through those tough times though? Like I remember on
Mm,
your website you say something like you're two mission driven people. I mean, is that
mm-hmm,
what propels you through these hard you've mentioned two different
mm-hmm,
pivots. I mean, is that what gets you going? Is it you're mission driven? You're very clear about what you want to do. You just haven't quite worked out the exact business plan, the exact
mm-hmm.
program, or the exact partnership?
I don't think it's passion that's kind of driving me this because I feel I have
Mm,
run on passion before and that burns out. You know, getting up and be like, oh, I love what I do. Like it's simply not sustainable to get up every day and love what you do because in any kind of work, even the work that you like doing, you're gonna come into situations and people and problems that you just hate so
yeah,
much.
yeah.
So I think centering our motivation on mission makes it like a discipline. It makes
Hmm.
it like, you know, you got to do this because if you don't do this, then who else will? Or more
Yeah,
like, you know, this is what's needed to be done. Because what are you going to tell your kids? What do you want to tell them? Like, do you want to
right.
tell them that, oh, mom and dad, part of mom and dad's job was, after we saved the world and everything, hey, mom and dad were
Mm,
part of that. You know, we were
yeah.
part of the Avengers who saved the world. Or do you want to say like, oh yeah, we were like not on the same team as the Avengers? Like,
Exactly.
it's that kind of mindset, I think,
Yeah.
and then the thing is like, if not this work, then what else would I be doing? So I think
Right.
that whole mission turning into a discipline, sort of like, oh, I got to work out every day, or I'm not
Mhm.
going to feel good about my body, or I got to
Yeah.
drink 4 liters of water every day, or I'm going to get dehydrated. It kind
Yeah.
of became the essence of our work 2 years in. I mean, definitely
Mm,
first year was all about like, oh, passion, excitement, new possibilities. But I think
yeah.
going to the second year, we're starting to realize that discipline is at the core of any success.
So speaking of that, where do you see yourselves in 5 years, and what's the
Mm,
disciplinary practices you got to put in place today
mm.
to achieve those things? I mean, it's not just setting expectations, it's doing the work. So you set an expectation for the 5 years. What is that? And then what's the work it's going to take to get there?
We don't have a goal yet for, in 5 years, we want to do like 100,000 hectares. We don't have that kind of goal yet, but we do want to be top of mind for
Yeah.
the company that people go to when they need any sustainability help in 5 years' time.
Mm,
And that is exactly why we invest so much in our storytelling,
yeah.
in social media,
Mm,
and yeah, building stories and building communities together. I think that's why we put all of these things in place so that in 5 years' time, when the time comes for everybody to, when it becomes mandatory for everyone to think about sustainability as
yeah.
a backbone of their business, then they have one person, one entity to come to, and that's Bumitera.
All right. Last question. If you're talking to an aspiring entrepreneur today, someone young, bubbly, full of energy,
Mhm.
running at the world, ready to
Yeah.
launch something, what are the two or three things that you'd give them to make their launch a little bit easier?
What would I give them to make their launch a bit
What
easier.
advice?
Yeah, what advice? Don't sweat about thinking about competitors, number one,
Mm,
because if you're truly starting something new and what you feel is unique, what you feel is true to you, it will be very, very difficult to find competitors who do exactly what you do. That's number one.
mm,
And number two, even if you do see someone as your competitor, don't just don't think about what they do.
yeah.
You can see what they're doing on social media and see what they're doing from time to time, but you don't have to be so obsessed about them. I
Mm,
think a mistake that we made in the beginning was worry so much about how we were perceived within the carbon community, because that's how we started, right? Carbon. But now that we're more into nature, ecosystem restoration, community
mm,
restoration, we don't even look at the carbon markets in that way
right.
anymore, you know? So
Right.
it's like, oh, we've become something of our own. And
Right.
working on that, working on yourself and what you're doing is so much more valuable than spending your time thinking about what others may think of you or how you fit
Yeah.
in into the industry economics.
There was a great quote I heard one time that you never put more points on the board by looking at the scoreboard. You only
Mm,
put more points on the board by playing the game, right? And
yeah, I like
it's
that.
funny, like when you mention those two things, I'm like you do spend some time on that. And
Yeah.
I've been there. I'm not judging at all. Like it's sometimes it's really hard, especially when you're going through a struggle, you're going
Hmm.
through a pivot, and you're like, shit, like they made it happen.
Yeah.
And at some
Uh-huh.
point, you're like, wait a second, I just need to make progress. And at some point,
Uh-huh.
someone's going to look at mine and go, hey, they made that happen. Like,
Yeah.
everyone's done the work, right? And looking at a scoreboard is not working. Looking at the mirror in the gym is not working. Like you need to make sure that you're really putting the time in. And that's the path. Sometimes that's the
Hmm.
hard part. Sometimes that's the fun of it. Like that's the beauty. But
Yeah.
again, that's why I love telling these stories. That's why I really appreciate your time because I know you do have better things to be doing than to be sitting on a podcast, yapping and thinking about things. But you've got a lot to do, so I appreciate your time.
No, absolutely. It's been a pleasure. I mean, it's good for me too. Talking sometimes reminds me
Yeah.
why I do this in the first place. So it's a good centering. It can be a good centering activity
Yeah.
sometimes. Yeah.
Well, when you run a podcast of entrepreneurs, you get very centered as an entrepreneur about this path. So, it is a shared journey. I call it the beautiful pain, and
The beautiful pain. Yeah.
we'll get there eventually.